Hi, and welcome to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. Today is episode number 51. I'm your host, Phil Huber. I'm joined by John and Logan, the usual suspects. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the tool that woodworkers love to discuss most, your workbench. Both Logan and I are looking to build new ones in the new year. So it's New Year's Day, a new round of podcasts, and hopefully some new resolutions and ideas for your shop. So stick around for today's episode.
This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
Well, crap, now I have to build one this year.
I said we're thinking about it.
Year.
Yeah.
Shoot. Yeah.
Think about all the other things. All the other things that you've said that in the past that you were going to do and you never did. So
that's true. Mm-hmm. Have you been talking to my wife? If 2021's anything like 2020 was, I'm going to have plenty of time to work on a workbench.
Mm-hmm. Now, John's not in this situation because at various company auctions, he's purchased 14 different benches. So
yeah, I have the market on workbenches.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a workbench, I can cut you a deal.
He knows the guy.
To be fair, full disclosure, neither your workbench, Logan, nor mine is dysfunctional or poor. They both are adequate, well-built shop tools.
But they both have one fatal flaw. They have the same fatal flaw.
Right.
Right?
And that is the open base.
Oh, stupidest thing ever. That's right, all you Roubo people. Stupid.
Who did you offend last podcast? It was the... or somebody.
Did I offend your last podcast?
Or was it Phil? Phil had some gripes about...
split fences on a router
table. My last offense that I made was offending people with my fur.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So there was that.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, Phil, my workbench is functional. I use it all the time.
Right.
I built it probably 7 or 8 years ago. And the open base is like my Achilles heel. It just is dumb.
Yeah.
And by open base, I mean my bench has 4 legs, it has a shelf underneath, and the shelf is a flat space. That stuff gets stacked.
Right. Because it's nice to be able to have some accessories or tools or whatever close by when you're working at your bench. So it's stuff that you frequently use. Like I have a couple of stops, like bench stops that fit in dog holes under there. Mm-hmm. A small little miter box for a pull saw, a tote for my sanding supplies, various cauls and things like that for gluing up stuff. It's all things that I use by the bench and grab frequently. But and I guess the funny part is whenever you see, and we're guilty of it too, is you see photos of a workbench in a magazine or on the Instagrams or something, and it's usually somebody planing a board, and there's like 3 or 4 shavings casually curated on the floor and on the bench, and otherwise for a photo, and otherwise it's this pristine, great use of negative space area, when in reality the space below my workbench looks like a guinea pig cage exploded in there.
Yes, because you don't ever take a plane, or it's very rare that you grab a hand plane and you make 3 shavings.
Right.
Like 3 passes of a board, it creates a lot of shavings.
Yeah.
Right. And I would like to say that the stuff that's under my bench right now is just a ballast to hold my bench down. And looking at it, you would think, oh, that's just ballast under there because it's piled full of crap that he doesn't need under there. And that's completely true. So at one point, I did have all these planes that are back behind me. If you guys are watching on YouTube,
right,
those were all under my bench. And I got sick of them being buried in shavings. So I moved them. And now under my bench, it's just crap, like jigs and templates. I have a router under there and a belt sander. And so it's just, I feel like there is much room for improvement under my bench.
Right.
Now I am going to change a couple other things about my bench, but what's your gripe with your bench, Phil?
Well, I guess part of my gripe is the glamour shot that you see with benches where, most of the bench surface is empty, usually a hand plane on it, because apparently we can't get away from that. But I use hand planes quite a bit, but I'm also using other things, carving tools, hand saws, routers, drills, my biscuit joiner, and all of those create debris of one sort or another. And in the natural motion of woodworking, that all just kind of gets sucked underneath that open bench space. And I just don't like having that look like it's a disaster all the time. And the other thing that I don't like about it is, so I have lower stretchers on my base, and I think I have a video on our YouTube channel of my workbench that I did kind of a tour of it. The stretchers, the lower stretchers on the base are, 4 to 6 inches above the floor. And so when you're working and there's a bunch of shavings around, naturally you're going to kick some of those shavings under the bench. And the underside of that base, granted, nobody really sees it, is just kind of a mouse nest of shavings and chips and dust and spider webs. I mean, it looks like Mirkwood Forest under there.
Yeah.
And I don't like that because my garage is an unconditioned space right now. So I just don't want to create a home for vermin.
Sure.
I've seen mice in the garage before. I mean, it just is kind of natural, but
Well,
I don't want to create a home for them. And I just want to go ahead.
I was saying, do you guys remember me sending you guys a picture on Teams when I was vacuuming out from underneath my bench and I sucked out a piece of raccoon pelt that I had like tanned at one point, and it scared the crap out of me because I'm like under there with my Dyson vacuum sucking out wood chips, and all of a sudden fur comes out, and I was like, what is this? And that was my first thought. I was like, oh my God, the critter crawled under my bench. It's in my house. I don't know how that happened. And then I realized it was like a piece of pelt that I had for flying or tying flies and stuff. But yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's basically the same gripe I have, right? It sucks because stuff just gets piled.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever, over your time using that bench, how long have you had that bench?
I think when I did the video, I looked it up. It's got to be close to 10 years.
Okay. So
Plus
over those 10 years, have you come across things that you don't like about the bench other than that, like work holding or any of that stuff, or things you do like about it?
Yeah. Overall, I like the size of it.
Okay.
I was originally going for something about 3 foot by 6 foot because we had a bench. One of the 2 main benches in the magazine shop are like almost 8 by 3 and change or something like that.
Sure.
And at first I thought I liked that wider, deeper, I guess, the depth of it. And I do. It's nice because when I'm working, I have plenty of space to put large assemblies or panels when I'm working on it.
Sure.
So the overall size I like.
Okay.
When I built it, I was kind of going for a hybrid top construction.
Okay.
So the main body of the bench top is MDF because at the time I was in full thriftiness mode
Sure.
of using all the MDF scraps that we had. So, and also knowing that on a workbench, most of the heavy work takes place in that first 12 inches or so.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the underneath of my bench top, the first, I don't know, like 10, 12 inches is, I think, 4 layers of MDF solid. And then that 4 layers continues as like edging around the ends and then the back edge. On the back left 2/3 of the bench is only a single layer of MDF thick. And that's because I had been using in the magazine shop, where the editor's shop was, we had a Festool MFT table for a long time. And I kind of like those MFT clamps that Festool has, where they just kind of hook into the top and then you can clamp something down on top of it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to incorporate that versatility into my workbench. So the front edge is thick for heavy duty planing and pounding and stuff. The back edge has these open, thinner sections where I can use those MFT clamps on. I originally designed the bench with a kind of a homebrew twin screw vise on the right-hand side, being a lefty. That I was thinking that I would, for dovetailing or whatever. I don't do a lot of hand dovetailing, and a twin screw vise, at least the way that I made it, doesn't hold boards on edge very well, a long board, because what happens is the bench jaw or the vise jaw kind of cocks down, so you get kind of an unequal grip on it.
Yeah, almost like you need shims on the bottom edge of the jaw.
And at least in the way that I did it, because I used some veneer press screws as the...
Okay. Yep.
So anyway, so where those sections are on that twin screw vise, I put 2 dog holes so that I could, clamp something to the surface with bench dogs. So I have 2 thicker sections that line up with those bench dogs. Now I have a couple of holdfasts, like I have one of the Gramercy holdfast that you pound in, and then I also have one of Veritas's threaded knob hold down, I guess, but works on the same principle. Hammerless holdfast, maybe that's the right word. So I really like using those. And then the house that we were living in at the time, to make a long story even longer, was built in the 1920s. And up in the attic, I found some 2x4s from when the house was built. And it's like old growth, southern yellow pine, I believe. Really cool grain on it. So that's what I edged the bench with and did half-blind dovetails on the end caps and on the front. And the dovetails aren't perfect, but it was always fun for me to be able to see that on there. So I like that look to it. But somehow, because I built the bench top over time, like over my lunch hours at work, I'd glue up sections and then, clamp them with screws as the glue was drying. I don't know, because it's MDF, if over time the top has sagged a little bit, because there is some deflection longitudinally. If that's happened because it's MDF, or in the process of gluing up the top, did I essentially do a bent lamination and glued in deflection to it? I don't know. I don't know how I could figure that out. the top is so thick and relatively rigid. It's not like I can put an intermediate post in there to raise it back up.
Yeah.
And it's MDF, and I've planed MDF and plywood before, but I just don't know that it's worth it to try and flatten it with hand tools.
Yeah. Well, John, you have an MDF top on yours, right?
Yeah, it's basically the same workbench that you guys use in the shop here, your editor's bench or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Have you
I've had
noticed
it for
any
like
deflection?
10 years, and I haven't noticed any deflection. And it's the same as what Phil has kind of described, where it's 4 layers, around the main edges, and then open, or 2 layers in the middle part of the bench. And I haven't noticed any deflection. I don't know that, like, maybe the 2x edging has helped support it a little bit, and it's well supported by the frame. So I haven't noticed any deflection or sagging at any point. So
Yeah.
I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, MDF over time has been known to sag or whatnot, but I've been pretty happy with the performance of mine. And I was being thrifty at the time too, and just building it out of MDF, because it's like, oh, if I tear this up or get sick of this, it's not that big of an investment. So, it seemed like a wise choice to use MDF. But I mean, it's held up, and it's, pretty much like new. I've had to, add some finish on it here and there as it's gotten dried out or worn down a little bit, but still performing like it did 10 years ago. So,
and the thing I like about MDF is that it's really smooth. And I mean, if you glue it up flat, it's flat. So those are all big pluses for a bench, that it's not something that's going to undergo a lot of seasonal movement like a solid wood top could.
Sure.
So what about your bench?
Well, so mine is, when I built my bench, I built it kind of on the thrifty side as much as I could. The top itself is a bowling alley lane. Okay. So much so that it still has the lane markers in the left-hand side of the bench top, actually in the center too. Has the little plastic lane markers in it. And I bought it because, so this was at the very beginning of, not at the very beginning of my woodworking. So I started woodworking when I was in high school, but like, this was my first house. My first time I had my own shop. So it was like my first, like, I have room for my own bench now. And I had some MDF ones. Actually, no, I take that back. My first bench that I built was just a 2x4 frame. And then we'd replaced the countertops in our house. And I had a 7-foot section of countertop that I was using. And it worked fine. But as I started to get back into woodworking more and more seriously and picking up hand tools, I started reading books. And I don't know, Chris Schwarz was on his, kick of workbenches built in the 17th century on April 23rd by the Shaker colony in wherever, just one of those kicks on a certain bench. So I started reading, and I was like, okay, so I had an idea of what I wanted, and I knew my bench top needed to be thick, it needed to be heavy. And I found a guy here in town that had a bunch of bowling alley lanes. And I'm like, okay, that's hard maple. That makes a good bench top from what I read. I'm going to go get it. So I went and got it. So first of all, my bench is a little over 7 foot long. It's in between 7 and 8 feet. It is 3.5 feet deep. And the top itself, I just measured those. So my aprons around the top are 4.5 inches thick. The center section of my bench, where the actual bowling alley is, the bowling alley, if I remember right, was 3 inches. Nope, it would be 2.5 inches. Okay. But what I did not realize about a bowling alley, and this is why whenever somebody asks me about bowling alleys, and it always comes up because bowling alleys always are getting tore out and replaced stuff, and people save the lanes. And a lot of times people ask, oh, is that going to make a good bench top? I mean, yeah, it's hard maple, but every row of a bowling alley lane is held together with twist nails. So each lane or each row is nailed to the 2 rows next to it, because the nails are like 4 inches long. They go through at least 3 layers, maybe 4. And they're twist nails. They are hard as hard could be. And I started pulling out some of the nails and I realized this is dumb. Like, this is going to take me years. Like, I can just go mow my neighbor's yards and buy the lumber, like get enough money to buy the hard maple instead of doing this stupid crap. So what I ended up doing is I ended up just pulling the nails out of probably, I'm going to say 8 rows. And then I glued those back together. And that's where my bench dogs are. Okay. My bench dog holes. Because I didn't want to drill through them.
Right.
But part of that is the bowling lanes aren't glued together. They're just nailed together. That's it. And there's like a wide tongue you can groove on the faces of them. So kind of think of like Lego type construction.
Sure.
But they sag because they're nailed together. They just sag. I think they must put these directly over some form of substrate that's flat.
Sure.
So what I ended up doing for this bench top is the bowling alley lane, then 2 layers of like BCX plywood. It's whatever cheap plywood they had at Menards, and I glued and screwed 2 layers of that to the bottom side of the bench. Now, yeah, that does limit the expansion and contraction of the bench, but I've never had any issues with it. It stayed flat. It has stayed as flat could be. Sure. And one other thing I did is I routed a dado on the bottom side before I put the plywood on, and I have some 3.5 foot all thread in there with nuts and with nuts and washers on the ends to kind of squeeze those layers together before I glued them onto the plywood.
Oh yeah.
And then I edged everything in some, this is spalted box elder around for my edging all the way around. Now I do have a leg vise. I do have a tail vise, a wagon. I guess that would be considered a wagon vise, right?
Yeah.
And then the base itself is made out of some really, really thick. I did a good job on the base, if I do say so myself, knowing what my skills were back then. So mortise and tenon on the base, and they are like 7-inch square legs. Yeah, they're huge. Like I way overdid it on those. But I don't think my bench top, I'm sitting here with my knees under the bench top. I don't think it's actually attached to the base. I can lift it up a little bit, but it's so heavy it never moves. Yeah. And a couple of things I like about the bench is I do like how the hard maple is flat and it hasn't moved at all. I like the height that it's at, because that's another big thing that people always ask. How high should I make a bench? And if you go into our shop, you'll see some high benches. Like Chris's bench is very high. It's too high for me to work at. Even the one that in our editor's area is 36 inches. So which is super high. And I think this one, let's see what this one's at. This one is at 33 and a quarter, something like that. So, it's perfect height for me. The things I don't like about it is I don't like the size. I actually would like it to be a little smaller, because it's very rare that I use the entire bench. And if I do use the entire bench, I wish the bench was bigger. Logically, obviously. Yeah. But 99% of what I do, I could get away with a 6-foot bench, and it would give me another 1.5 feet of room in here, which would be really nice. Yeah. It doesn't need to be the 40 inches deep that it is. I would think I would be much better off with like a 32, something like that. Yeah. And aside from that, I don't like the shelf underneath, as we've discussed. So I guess, as I'm considering building a bench, I'm looking at a couple different designs. First of all, obviously, first thing I need to address is the shelf underneath. Okay. That sucks. It's stupid. So obviously cabinets are the first thing, or drawers. Okay. So it will have some form of storage underneath, some form of drawers, The one Chris uses, and anybody that hasn't seen Chris's workbench, go to the Woodsmith Facebook page and take a look at some of the Friday Live videos we've done. You'll see Chris's bench in there. Yeah. It is, I think we consider it, do we call it a shaker bench? Yeah, there we go. Classic cabinet base workbench. Phil's holding it up if you guys are watching on YouTube. I really like that drawer system that's on there. There is a series of like 5 drawers, 6 drawers on each side, and then a set of double doors in the center. I like that style. The work holding options on that are a tail vise and a face vise.
Right.
Which is what we put on it. I will say I have one of the bench crafted leg vise hardware kits. So I will put a leg vise on whatever bench I end up building. And I think I will also put a tail vise. I'm very anti tool well because I think we had one on that little Scheuberg's bench we had, right, in the editor's shop before.
Oh, yeah.
And it was sucked because it's another place for shavings just to catch.
Yes.
Right? It'd be better if there was just a hole in the center and all the shavings just fell into a garbage bag attached to the bench. So I'm anti-tool well. I'm kind of, so basically what I'm getting at is I'm either leaning at that cabinet-based bench that Chris has because I really like that style. Might change the size because it is a very large bench.
Yeah.
Yep. Or the shaker style workbench plans from Bench Crafted.
Oh, yeah.
I really like that look. It incorporates the work holding that I want, which is a leg vise and a tail vise. And the base itself is kind of cool because it's made out of plywood. It's plywood base, and they're painted like cabinets, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is kind of cool. And I would be completely down for that. I would like, and we don't have one around. I would like to try like a Scandinavian style bench. With the like big shoulder vise on it, you mean? Or yes. I would just like to try one. I know, was it Frank Klaus? Mm-hmm. He has one that he uses. And I just would like to try it. I don't know that I necessarily want to use that or make that my bench. But yeah, those are kind of the two I'm leaning towards. And
what would you do for a top?
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The thing I like about the shaker style bench from Bench Crafted is that the base is plywood. So really I only need to source wood for the top. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard, but I have a sawmill. So I have a lot of wood.
Not to brag.
I know, right? So I have a lot of ash, and I think ash would make a pretty decent top. And I have enough ash that I could probably have the entire top be quarter sawn, which I think would work really well. I also have some soft maple, some curly soft maple, so I don't really want to turn that into the bench top. But I think beech, honestly. Beech is so inexpensive so most of the lumber we buy for the magazine comes from Liberty Hardwood here in Des Moines, or the Woodsmith store. But I priced some beech at Liberty Hardwood, and it was like cheaper than ash. It was like the cheapest hardwood you could buy from them. And I want to say it was like the 8-quarter stock was like $2 something a board foot. Like it was dirt cheap. So if I'm just buying the material for a bench top, let me just do the math here. So like, let's call it a 3.5 inch bench top by 32 inches by 72 inches. That's 56 board feet. So call it 65, right?
Yeah.
That's not that big of an investment to make a bench top. If you consider the fact that buying the lumber kit for like a Roubeau style is several $1,000s. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just something that I've been considering. I mean, do you have any notion of what your plans are with yours?
I'm pretty torn because part of me, and we were talking about this before we started the show, is I built my bench right now, kind of hoping it would be my forever bench, so to speak. But I don't know that that's a realistic thing to tell a woodworker. Like you want to build your bench well, but don't get attached to it because your needs, shop space, blah, blah, blah might change over time.
Yeah.
So, and I'm still a pretty thrifty person. So part of me wants to see if there's a way that I take the top that I already have and rescue it, so to speak. But then it's like, now I got to figure out its flatness issue.
Sure.
How would I flatten it? Would I just glue on more MDF to the thin parts at the back? If I do the cabinet base bench, which I would like to do the cabinet base, that would put where my bench dog holes currently are too far back. So now I have to fill all those bench dog holes and then re-drill them. But then I know when I glued up the bench, I used screws in there sometime. I don't really want to drill into a bunch of wood screws.
Yeah.
So I talk myself into fixing it and using what I have because I really like that reclaimed lumber around the side. Or do I just, cut that off with a circular saw and reuse it somewhere else on a new bench? Or, otherwise I take it over to your place, Logan, and we just bonfire the Valkyries and
that's right,
light that baby.
Yeah. So I do have a wood, it's called a nail biter drill bit in case you do need it. Cause same thing when I was drilling bench or not dog holes, but I was actually drilling holdfast holes in my bench. I only took the screws out of the nails out of the first, 7 or 8 inches, like I said.
Oh yeah.
So I'm like, I know I'm going to run into screws. So I spent $20 on a nail. It's called it's an Irwin nail biter or something like that. And it eats through metal. So if you do drill into them, let me know. Cause I got it.
And when I drilled the bench dog holes originally, I think I used a combination of like a 3/4 inch Forstner and a spade bit. And, I think I had recently acquired a brace. So I was trying to, do it that way, and a couple of hand drills that we had in the shop that just didn't have the muscle to get through it.
Yeah.
So my bench dog holes, if you were to put long bench dogs in them, they're all angled all over the place and wallowed out. And
so now that becomes a question that I wanted to ask. Do you guys, I know, John, you don't do a ton of handwork. That doesn't mean you don't use bench dogs occasionally. Do you prefer square or round bench dogs?
I don't know that I necessarily prefer them, but like round bench dogs are easier to add to a top. After the fact. There's, when you're doing the square ones, it's just a lot of planning up front. So, I don't know, maybe just from a lazy aspect, go with the round.
Okay.
Never had a problem with them.
I prefer the round. I like the look of the square ones, but again, I just don't like you got to know what you're doing with it. Plus, I like being able to, because I have that hold fast and the hold down, like being able to just drop those in to the bench dog holes to secure a workpiece. If I'm working on something wide, or to hold down a straight edge for doing dados on a router with a router or something like that. So I would say that I like the round ones better.
Okay. So I have round ones on my bench right now, and I don't like them. I like the fact that I can rotate them, meaning I can hold like odd shaped parts pretty easily because you do have the option to rotate them. However, I feel like I have the Lee Valley brass ones. They're very hard to get to go up and down in my bench top. And I don't know if it's just because my bench top is so thick, or if my holes are slightly undersized, they're very hard to get to go up and down. And I do have, the way my legs sit, two of my bench dog holes are right over the legs, so I have like the little wonder pups that pop up and down, and they work okay. That's one thing I actually was going to say. When I built my bench, and I like this feature, and this is something I might try to keep in a new bench. The front apron is flush with the front legs.
Right.
Because my leg vise is flush with my leg vise going through the leg of the bench is flush with the front of the apron. On the back, I did a overhang, and I did a 6.5-inch overhang. And I did that just so when I had this in my garage, in my old house, I could push it all the way up against the wall and it would straddle the foundation and the trim in the garage. You know what I mean? So you could still push it up against the wall without the legs being flush front and back. Because I think most like Rubo style ones, the legs are flush all the way around.
All the way around.
So you wouldn't be able to actually push it up against the wall if you have that, 4 or 5 inches of foundation that sticks out past your wall. So that's a feature that I would also want to keep in. So I guess with that in mind, Phil, are you planning on, if you do make a new top, do you have a preference for a hardwood over a softwood? Because I know this is something that a lot of people argue. It's like, no, your bench top needs to be really hard. And then there's people that argue the opposite. They say, hey, your bench top should actually be softer than the material you usually work with. That way, if you drop apart, your bench dings and not your workpiece.
Yeah. I don't really have a preference on it. I don't know that I would do, like basswood or something like that. But
sure.
I would be game for, like we have a couple of tops of benches that we've done where it's been Douglas fir. Now we've used vertical grain fir that costs $50 quadrillion, and I don't know that I would do that, but I would be all right with doing a fir top of construction lumber.
Or white fir that a coworker at the sawmill already.
Right. Yeah. And I would actually consider that other than, the weight of it. Like this bench top that we've been discussing, or the bench that we've been discussing from ShopNotes, for the YouTube folk, the front part of the bench is really thick where the dogs are, but then the back, I don't know, almost 3/4 is only 1-inch thick boards on edge. And then there's a pretty beefy rear apron assembly on it. So I kind of like that I've been drawn to that style. I think Mike Dunbar in an old Fine Woodworking did a bench where it was similar to that, where it was a real thick front section of the bench. And I think some of the shaker benches are like that, where it's thinner at the back. I don't know that I would go 1 inch, because I think Chris says that it feels a little springy back there sometimes.
I've heard him say that. Although, to be fair, Chris throws most of his tools, so I could see where that trampoline effect would come in.
Right. Yeah. So, but I could see doing 1.5-inch material back there, 8/4. If it got up to like 1 3/4 or something, because then I think that would allow my holdfasts to engage. Because
you do need a couple inches for the holdfast to grab, or else it won't friction fit in there.
Yeah,
or cam, I guess.
Right, and it doesn't do that on mine where that thinner section is. So I would be open to that. I don't know that I want. I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. I would even do. John suggested an MDF top again. I'm not entirely opposed to that because I've seen how some of ours have fared with that.
And it's funny because people always ask that. They're always like, oh my God, that has a MDF top on it. Like, how is it not swollen? And it's like, no, it really doesn't. I mean, unless you spill water on it and don't wipe it up, you slob,
Yeah, just keep water directly off of it and make sure to put some sort of wood edging because it's got brittle edges or corners.
But like your bench, John, like mine is in a, your garage is pretty well unconditioned. And you've had your bench for a while, and I've had mine, and I don't really have finish on mine.
No, I just have used General Finishes Seal-A-Cell on it, put a couple coats, and if it, dries out or I need to clean it up a little bit, sand it, and add a couple more coats and just keep that on it so glue and stuff doesn't stick to it. But that's the only real finish that I put on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a couple tops in the shop that are MDF that I think were built probably 20 plus years ago, and they might have a urethane top or finish on it.
Yeah.
And it's held up fine. So
yeah, it's not like they're all dinged up or pockmarked or something like that. That's
So here's the question for you guys. Now with the MDF top, you can't really do this, but I have seen in the past where a lot of people will hit their bench top of a hardwood top or a solid wood top, I guess, with a toothing plane. You guys have any opinions on that?
The idea is to make it, a toothing blade is serrated finely.
Yep.
And so if you go across with that, then the idea is that it's a little grippier for a workpiece. I've never really found that to be a problem, that I feel like I need to have it toothed, or I like having it relatively smooth because to me it's a little easier to get glue drips off of or whatever. So
I was just trying to look and see, because I seen it on a video excuse me, that somebody had been doing, they had a website that they're doing a bunch of woodworker shops, and one guy, I don't remember who it was, he had a big bench, like it was like a 7 foot by 7 foot bench where he had a different vise on each corner. So as he's working, he can walk around and basically, each vise has a different purpose, but he would, every couple months, he would retooth his top. So that's how he took glue drips off. That's how he said, he's like, look, I can nearly plane without putting a stop on it because it adds enough grip to my bench that it holds my work pieces. So it's always kind of interest me. I've had my toothing plane that I have is very, very fine. So it doesn't do much on this hard maple. But it's always interested me to maybe try it and see what would happen, I guess, see if I would notice a difference. Now, this is assuming that you keep your bench top flat, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
So now on that note, are you guys, I guess with MDF, you guys have to finish, but for a hardwood top, are you guys finishers or non-finishers? Because there's a lot of people that question, should I put a finish on my workbench? What should I put on my workbench? What's the most durable? What should I do with it?
I'm not really for putting a film finish on a workbench, just because it chips up and it's harder to reapply finish, and it's just really not necessary for the most part. So maybe like an oil finish or something, just to keep the glue from sticking to it, and just
like a linseed oil or a Danish oil or something.
Yeah. Well, like you have on yours, the Seal-A-Cell will build into a film finish, but just like 1 or 2 coats mostly just soak in and seal
especially
it.
MDF.
Yeah. And see, my bench is MDF, and I was going to, and I had actually even mixed up a batch of linseed oil, wax, and turpentine.
Yeah.
I was going to use that, and just never got around to it. And for the most part, hasn't been that big of a deal. But I will say that sometimes I'll get a glue drip on there when I go to scrape it off. It will pull out a little divot of the MDF, and that's not cool.
Yeah. See, I've always meant to do a linseed oil finish, but I'm now more of the motor oil, paint, linseed oil, and graphite and Sharpie finish is kind of what I'm at now.
Yeah.
I used to be the first time that I drilled into my workbench top, I was like, oh my God, now I write on my workbench. I mean, I just do everything on it. It's like tearing chainsaws apart on the workbench. My youngest son is 3, and his favorite thing to do is to come in here, climbs up on my sawhorse next to me, or my saw bench next to me, and says, Daddy, why you write on table? Because he sees all my scribbles all over the table, and he knows you're not supposed to write on a table. And it's trying to explain to him, buddy, this is my workbench. If I have to jot a note down, this is where I do it.
Yeah.
But so I guess and I've always liked the idea of putting some form of finish, whether it is just a paste wax or a oil finish. It could be linseed oil, it could be wax, it could be Danish oil, tongue oil, something to protect it. However, I am guilty of just writing on my bench, and I know Chris is too. I've seen Chris do it.
Yeah.
I mean, he always has a pad of paper on his bench, but if he needs something, I've watched him scribble on his bench before. So
Sure.
It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Not a big deal. When I surface it, the next time in 18 years when I surface my bench,
They'll go away.
I'll take it off. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. One thing that I did think about, and this actually stemmed from our friend Matt Cremona up in Minneapolis. He's now starting to work on workbench kits, where he is custom sawing Roubeau workbench kits.
Right.
So he's basically getting large logs, quarter sawing 2 bench tops out of a log. And then his kit basically is the leg stock, the apron or stretcher stock, and then the bench tops. And he's sending them out for a vacuum kiln drying, and they're going to be pricey. There's a lot that goes into sawing a log that large, and you have to find logs that large to get them, and then you have to pay to have them kiln dried. Yeah. And I thought about going that route, not necessarily buying one from Matt. Sorry, Matt, but sawing my own. But just I'm a little afraid of movement.
Yeah.
Now, if it's kiln dried, it'll be fine. I don't have access to a vacuum kiln. So, it's and actually the guy that I bought my my spalted apron stock from, my spalted box elder apron from, he was doing the same thing. He was out like in Adele, somewhere west of Des Moines. And he had some really big elm slabs that were like 4 inches thick that he was in the process of working on a bench top for, which I thought was interesting at the time. And now I'm seeing people kind of starting to do that. And it's interesting. Just I'm afraid of the movement.
Yeah.
I've never had to flatten my bench. I understand that most people want a bench as flat as they can get it because it's a reference surface. However, I know my first couple workbenches I had weren't flat.
Yeah.
I know there's workbenches we have that are not flat,
Right.
So is it that big a deal? Yes and no.
Yeah.
But I'm not using my workbench to flatten and prep stock by hand. I'm getting my flat stock from other tools. So
yeah.
That's what a table saw top's for.
That's right.
Glue up assemblies and
yes,
nice and flat.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, the one thing that I have thought about is I would like to specifically, and Phil, I think you have this in your shop. You have a light right above your workbench, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Mine are not right above my workbench. Mine are basically flush with the back edge and flush with the front edge of the bench. I mean, it's well lit enough, but I would like to maybe move a light to get some light right above my bench. It'd probably be easier to just move the bench, but
Yeah.
It would be nice to have that light right above the bench.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But yeah.
I think part of the thing about talking about benches too is that and this is a lot of things with woodworking, with building projects, is that it's fun to think about all the possibilities until you actually start doing it. And then you have to make deliberate choices.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's where I think a lot of people, I think that's why it's such a hot topic with woodworkers is, what bench should I build? I mean, you don't really know until you build one and use it and decide if you like it or not. Yeah. And that's the problem. It's like, unless you have the opportunity to go work on somebody's, Scandinavian style bench or Nicholson bench or Roubeau or, I mean, yeah, those benches are just styles. I mean, but if you have the opportunity to work on them and figure out what you like and don't like, great. But be aware that you're probably going to build a bench, if you're going to build a bench, and you'll find stuff that you don't like about it.
Yeah.
not that big a deal.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I know Phil's bench, supposedly when he's done with it, we're going to have a bonfire at my house with it. Do you think it's worth selling a bench? Like, I mean, my bench is well built. It's heavy.
Yeah.
I think I could probably sell it.
Yeah, I think your bench probably. Mine looks a little tough for the wear. I don't know what. I guess I'd debate as to what I would get for it other than garage sale prices.
Well, yeah,
Is
and
it
see,
worth
that's the
it
thing
to
with
sell
mine.
it if I'm going to get $28 out of it?
Yeah, well, and the thing with mine. Like, I might be able to get a couple $100 out of it. Just somebody that is serious enough about woodworking that they know they need a bench, but they don't want to take the time or the investment to build one from scratch.
Yeah.
My leg vise I've decided I do not like the peg style leg vise. So I have the pin that I have to replace. I don't like that. I don't change it half the time. So that thing gets levered around pretty hard when I'm gripping stuff from 8 inches wide to, 3/4 inch wide. But, it's not the greatest bench it's not the greatest, looking bench in the world, but it works for what I need it for. But yeah, I think sadly sometime this year, a new bench will come to fruition. If I can convince everybody to let me do it on video, then it actually has to get done.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll see. I do have the bench crafted crisscross sitting in the back room right now that I feel like I need to use, but I feel like that means I need to buy all other bench crafted hardware to do it, which is not cheap.
Yeah. Well, and see, Chris did a prototype on a wood threading kit years ago, and I have in my office here wood thread, pretty big wood screw with a hub and a nut for it. So if I wanted to, I could do a leg vise with it, but I just don't know if I want to go the leg vise route. I don't.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Well, like I said a couple of weeks ago, I feel like I should just buy another Wilton and stick that on my bench because that's my new favorite woodworking vise. Then there's no problem. Just use that for everything.
Yeah. And see, I have a Wilton quick release bolt on face vise on my bench that I put a wood jaw on, and I love it. I love the quick release action of it. It grips everything that I need it to. I don't have a tail vise. I used to have that Wilton on the end of my bench when I originally built it and had the twin screw, and then I used that because I remember reading that somewhere about using a bolt-on face vise as a tail vise.
Yep.
The only problem is when you tighten that up, those style of vices will want to cock up a little bit. Yes. So your workpiece raises up off the bench. And I had a hard time keeping stock or workpieces down on the bench where it was secure, where it wouldn't shift around.
Sure.
So, and not having an end vise or tail vise, I don't really miss it.
Yeah. I have that problem with mine too. Mine's just one of the, it's like the Lee Valley cheap green powder coated tail vise.
Oh yeah. It's like
screws
made in Eastern Europe somewhere.
Exactly. And it works okay, but my wagon sliding block thing that I have in there, same thing. It cocks up a little bit. I don't know. I need something different. I just don't know what it is. I will say I've seen a couple woodworkers whom I respect highly. They have the Emerson like pattern maker vices.
Oh yeah, the Emmert,
yeah, Emmert, yeah. There was one that popped up for sale around here a couple of years ago. And I actually asked our old editor Vince about it. I was like, "Hey, do you know anything about these?" He's like, not a ton. He's like, "I know they're expensive." And I think they had like $300 or $400 on it. And I wish I would have grabbed it, because everybody that says they have one, that's the only vise they will have now.
Oh, really?
Is a pattern maker vise. Yeah. And I think somebody makes a reproduction of them. I don't know who. Wood River has one, I guess. But yeah, and actually Highland Woodworking has a couple. So I don't know. I guess that's an option. That's always an option. Maybe if I make my bench a workaround bench, meaning you can work around all sides of it. Like we kind of did that, Phil, with the one that we use as editors. We put 2 vices on it. So there's a vice on one side for you, one side for me, or whoever's working there. So 2 people can be working at the same time.
Right.
I always liked the idea of being able to push the bench up against the wall. And actually that's how almost everybody's bench is in our shop, except Mark's, right?
Yeah.
Steve's is pushed up against the wall, although he doesn't use his bench a ton.
Yeah.
Chris's is pushed up against the wall. Dylan's was.
Yeah, now his is kind of out in space.
Yeah, but I do like being able to work around it, so maybe that's a possibility of adding a pattern maker vise on the back side of it. Yeah. I just know that some of those you have to have large swing capacity to tilt the vise in and out from underneath the bench. So I feel like that would need to be a decision that would be made up front as I would be building a bench. So all things to think about. Or we just go the new Chris Shores route and get a Roman bench, which is basically just a slab of wood with 4 staked legs.
See, there you go.
And you sit on it.
No, thanks.
Not my bench.
Yeah. John, you got anything else you want to add?
Nope, I think you guys covered it. I'm just excited to see what you come up with.
See, and if we do it on video, then I can build it here, still have my bench at home, and not be benchless in the intermediate. Or if I was trying to build it at home, then it's like I have a bench, building a bench, and now there's no room in my workshop.
Yeah, you don't want to be benchless.
No.
Or is benchless the new cool?
I will say my new bench will be a little bit taller than what the current one is. And I want to have it tall enough because I have a pair of stackable sawhorses. That was a ShopNotes plan. And my idea is that I could tuck those underneath the overhang of my bench when I'm not using them. However, the sawhorses stacked are like an inch too tall, so they don't stack underneath, or they don't slide underneath, and I would want to do that.
Yeah. I do like, I have an overhang on both ends of my bench, and that's where my saw benches live. Right. Which is nice to be able to throw them under there, slide them out when I need them. So that is another feature I would like to keep a hold of. So, but.
All right. So that's what we're doing in the new year. Somewhere in there, 2 new benches. Similar and yet vastly different.
Yep.
Okay. Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks for listening to the ShopNotes Podcast. Like we've talked about, we broadcast the video version of the podcast on our YouTube channel, so you can check us out there. It's also a great place if you want to leave any questions, comments, or smart remarks. You can also email us, woodsmith@woodsmith.com, and check out the show notes page for any references that we've made to specific things and some extra photos and materials. That's on our website, woodsmith.com/podcast. Hope you enjoy your New Year's Day, and here's to a much better 2021. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
This episode of ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build. From furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects, and jigs and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.